In the shadows of international espionage, where a single word can mean the difference between life and death, some secrets are buried so deep that even mentioning them is a death sentence. Sarah Chin thought she was just another cybersecurity analyst at a tech startup until the day a stranger walked in her coffee shop and whispered a code that officially didn't exist. What she whispered back would change everything she thought she knew about her past, her identity, and the dangerous world that had been watching her every move for the last 15 years. Some codes are meant to stay buried. Some people are meant to stay hidden. But when the past collides with the present in a downtown Seattle coffee shop, Sarah discovers that running from who you really are is impossible when that identity is programmed into your very DNA. The question isn't whether she can escape her past. It's whether she can survive long enough to understand why everyone she's ever trusted has been lying to her. Sarah Chun pressed the laptop lid closed and rubbed her tired eyes. The digital clock on her desk read 2:47 a.m., but sleep felt impossible when she was this close to cracking the encryption algorithm that had been haunting her for 3 weeks. Outside her apartment window, Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood lay quiet except for the occasional rumble of a late-night bus. She had been working as a cybersecurity analyst at Nexus Technologies for 2 years, and this was supposed to be just another routine security audit. A client had reported suspicious network activity, and Sarah's job was to trace the source and patch any vulnerabilities. But what she found buried in the code made her question everything she thought she knew about network security. The encryption wasn't standard. It wasn't even close to anything she had seen in her 6 years of professional experience or during her computer science degree at MIT. The patterns were too sophisticated, too elegant, and too deliberately hidden to be the work of common hackers. Whoever had written this code had access to military-grade encryption techniques that weren't supposed to exist in civilian networks. Sarah stood up and walked to her kitchen, grabbing a cold cup of coffee from the counter. She had been living on caffeine and determination for the past 72 hours, barely remembering to eat. Her reflection in the microwave door showed dark circles under her brown eyes, and her black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked exactly like what she was, an overworked tech professional pushing herself too hard. But something about this case felt different. Personal. Every time she stared at the code, she felt a strange familiarity, like trying to remember a dream that slips away the moment you wake up. The mathematical patterns seemed to whisper something just beyond her comprehension, and the feeling made her skin crawl. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss, Marcus Webb. Even at this hour, he was apparently still awake and thinking about work. The message was simple: coffee tomorrow at Grind Coffee on Pine. 8 Uhr morgens. Need to discuss the Nexus audit. Sarah frowned. Marcus never requested in-person meetings for routine cases, and he certainly never suggested meeting at coffee shops instead of the office. In the 2 years she had worked for him, their conversations had been strictly professional and always conducted within the sterile walls of Nexus Technologies. This sudden change in pattern triggered the analytical part of her brain that had made her so good at identifying security threats. She set her phone down and returned to her laptop, opening the encrypted files one more time. The code seemed to pulse on the screen, its logic flowing in ways that felt almost organic. Sarah had always prided herself on being able to read code like literature, understanding not just what it did, but how the programmer thought. This code felt different. It felt alive. As she scrolled through line after line of complex algorithms, something caught her attention. Embedded within the encryption was a sequence that didn't belong. It wasn't functional code, but rather a series of numbers and letters that served no purpose in the program's operation. Sarah had seen this before, years ago, but couldn't place where. She copied the sequence into a separate document. 7G9X4K2P901 and May 5Q3R6D. The moment she typed the last character, a memory surfaced so suddenly that she gasped. She was 8 years old, sitting in a sterile white room, while a woman in a lab coat showed her flashcards with similar sequences. The woman had called it a memory game, but even at 8, Sarah knew it was something more important than that. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. Her childhood had been spent in various foster homes after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. The details of that time were fuzzy, which her therapist had explained was normal for traumatic childhood experiences. But this memory felt different, clearer, more real than the vague recollections she usually had of her early years. Sarah closed the laptop and tried to push the strange feeling aside. She had work to do tomorrow, and Marcus Webb wasn't the kind of boss who tolerated employees who came to meetings unprepared. Whatever was hidden in this code, she would figure out after she understood why her boss wanted to meet in such an unusual location. The next morning arrived faster than Sarah had hoped. She dressed in her usual work attire, dark jeans, a simple sweater, and comfortable shoes that would let her walk the few blocks to grind coffee. The October air carried the smell of rain and fallen leaves, and she pulled her jacket tighter as she made her way down Pine Street. Grind Coffee was busy with the morning rush, filled with tech workers grabbing their caffeine fixes before heading to the various startups and corporations that populated Seattle's tech corridor. Sarah spotted Marcus immediately, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall. He was earlier than she expected, and he looked more serious than she had ever seen him. Marcus Webb was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the kind of calm demeanor that made him an excellent manager. He had hired Sarah directly out of MIT and had been a mentor as much as a boss. But this morning, something in his posture suggested he was carrying a weight she had never seen before. She approached the table cautiously, noting that he had already ordered her usual, a large coffee with 2 sugars and no cream. The fact that he remembered her coffee preference despite never having shared a meal or drink with her outside the office struck her as oddly intimate. "Sarah," Marcus said, standing as she reached the table. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. "Though I have to admit, this is a first. What's so important about the Nexus audit that it couldn't wait for the office?" Marcus glanced around the coffee shop, his eyes scanning the other patrons with the kind of systematic attention that Sarah associated with security professionals rather than software managers. When he was satisfied that no one was paying attention to their conversation, he leaned forward and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "What I'm about to tell you may sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully and trust me," he began. "The code you've been analyzing isn't just advanced encryption. It's a communication protocol developed by a classified government program that was officially shut down 15 years ago." Sarah felt her coffee cup slip slightly in her hands. "What are you talking about, Marcus? How would civilian network traffic contain classified government protocols?" "Because," Marcus said, his gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, "someone with access to those protocols is using them to communicate. Someone who was trained in that program before it was terminated." The rational part of Sarah's mind wanted to laugh. Marcus was talking about conspiracy theories and government secrets like they were discussing the weather. But the analytical part of her brain, the part that had made her so good at her job, recognized the truth in what he was saying. The code was too sophisticated for civilian applications. The patterns were too precise, too purposeful. "Assuming you're right," Sarah said carefully, "what does this have to do with me? I'm just the analyst who happened to find it." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. He placed it on the table between them, and Sarah noticed that the screen displayed a sequence of numbers and letters that made her heart skip a beat. It was the same sequence she had found hidden in the code the night before. 7G9X4K2P901MA105Q3R6D. Only covert forces use that code, Marcus said, watching her reaction carefully. Sarah stared at the device, her mind racing. The memory from the previous night came flooding back with even more clarity. The white room, the woman in the lab coat, the endless repetition of sequences just like this one. And suddenly, without conscious thought, words spilled from her mouth. "Delta 779, Charlie Mike," she said, the response coming from some deep part of her memory that she didn't even know existed. Marcus went completely still. The color drained from his face, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the coffee shop continued its normal morning rhythm, but Sarah felt as though the world had suddenly shifted on its axis. "Sarah," Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible, "where did you learn that countercode?" "I don't know," she whispered, and realized with growing horror that she was telling the truth. The words had come from somewhere beyond her conscious memory, triggered by a stimulus she didn't understand. "I don't remember learning it, but I know it's right." Marcus picked up his phone and typed a quick message. Within seconds, he received a reply that made him close his eyes and take a deep breath. "We need to leave," he said, standing abruptly. "Right now." "Marcus, what's going on? You're scaring me." He looked at her with something that might have been pity or admiration. She couldn't tell which. "Sarah, the program I mentioned, the one that was shut down 15 years ago, it wasn't just about encryption. It was about creating operatives with planted memories and embedded training that could be activated years later. And according to the response I just received, you're one of them." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "That's impossible. I would remember something like that. I've been in therapy. I know my own history." "Do you?" Marcus asked gently. "Think about it. How much do you really remember from before you were 8 years old? How many details do you have about your parents' accident? About the foster homes you lived in?" As much as Sarah wanted to argue, she couldn't. Her childhood memories were fragments at best, scattered pieces that had never quite formed a complete picture. Her therapist had assured her this was normal for trauma survivors, but now she wondered if there might be another explanation. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "then who am I really? And why is this happening now?" Marcus helped her to her feet, his movements quick and efficient. "Those are exactly the questions we need to find answers to. But not here. There are people looking for individuals like you, Sarah. People who either want to reactivate your programming or eliminate you as a security risk. And after what just happened, they'll know exactly where you are." As they walked toward the exit, Sarah caught a glimpse of a man in a dark suit who seemed to be paying too much attention to their conversation. When their eyes met, he immediately looked away and reached for his phone. The sight sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the October morning. Outside the coffee shop, Marcus guided her quickly down Pine Street toward a parking garage. "My car is on the second level," he explained. "We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out what to do next." "Marcus," Sarah said, struggling to keep pace with his longer stride, "if I really am some kind of sleeper agent or whatever, why are you helping me? How do I know you're not part of whatever program created me?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. For the first time since she had known him, Marcus Webb looked genuinely afraid. "Because," he said, "I was part of that program, and I've spent the last 15 years trying to protect the people who survived it." The parking garage felt like a concrete tomb as Marcus led Sarah toward a nondescript gray sedan on the second level. Every footstep echoed off the walls, and Sarah found herself checking over her shoulder every few seconds. The man in the dark suit from the coffee shop had followed them out, but she hadn't seen him since they entered the garage. "Get in," Marcus said, unlocking the car with a key fob that looked more sophisticated than standard automotive technology. "We need to be moving in 30 seconds. Sarah slid into the passenger seat, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. As Marcus started the engine, she noticed that the dashboard displayed more information than a normal car would show. GPS coordinates, communication frequencies, and what looked like a real-time traffic analysis scrolled across a small screen embedded in the center console. "Marcus," she said as they pulled out of the parking garage, "I need you to explain everything. Right now. What program? What happened to me? And why should I trust you when you just admitted you were part of it?" Marcus navigated through downtown Seattle traffic with the kind of precise efficiency that suggested he had planned their route in advance. He kept checking the mirrors, and Sarah noticed he took several turns that seemed designed to reveal whether they were being followed rather than to reach any particular destination. The program was called Project Mirror. He began, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had rehearsed this explanation many times. It started in 2007 as a joint initiative between the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency. The goal was to create deep cover operatives who could be placed in civilian populations without any conscious knowledge of their training or purpose. Sarah felt her stomach turn. You're talking about mind control. Not control exactly. More like programming. The subject for children, usually orphans or kids from unstable family situations. They would be placed in what appeared to be normal foster care or group homes, but were actually training facilities. The children received intensive education in languages, mathematics, computer science, and various technical skills. But the memories of this training were suppressed and replaced with false memories of normal childhood experiences. The car turned onto Interstate 5, heading north out of the city. Sarah watched the familiar Seattle skyline shrink in the side mirror and tried to process what Marcus was telling her. So you're saying I was kidnapped as a child and turned into some kind of programmed agent? Not exactly kidnapped. Your parents really did die in a car accident when you were 7. But instead of being placed with legitimate foster families, you were selected for Project Mirror because you showed exceptional aptitude for pattern recognition and mathematical analysis. You spent 3 years in training before being given a cover identity and false memories. Sarah stared out the window at the passing landscape, trying to reconcile Marcus's story with her own memories. But I remember foster homes. I remember the families I lived with. The memories are sophisticated. They're based on real places and real people, but modified to hide the training you received. Your brain was essentially programmed to remember a normal, if difficult, childhood while your subconscious retained all the skills and information you learned during those 3 years. This is insane, Sarah said, though even as she spoke, pieces of her life began to make more sense. Her unusual facility with computers, her ability to see patterns that others missed, the way she could learn new programming languages almost instinctively. If this is true, why was the program shut down? Marcus's expression darkened. Because the programmers got too ambitious. They didn't just want operatives who could be activated for specific missions. They wanted to create individuals who would naturally gravitate toward positions where they could gather intelligence without ever knowing they were doing it. But some of the subjects began to remember their training spontaneously. Others started displaying psychological instabilities that made them dangerous. Dangerous how? Some of them became completely unable to distinguish between their programmed memories and reality. Others developed multiple personality disorders. And a few, Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. A few became very effective killers with no conscious memory of their actions. The car exited the interstate at a sign for Everett, but instead of heading toward the city, Marcus turned onto a rural road that wound through dense Pacific Northwest forest. Sarah realized she had no idea where they were going, and the isolation of their surroundings made her increasingly nervous. Marcus, I need you to stop the car. Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to get somewhere safe before. Stop the car. Now. Marcus pulled over at a gravel turnout beside a small lake. The October morning was crisp and clear, and the water reflected the surrounding evergreen trees like a mirror. They were completely alone. Sarah got out of the car and walked to the edge of the water, tried to clear her head. Everything Marcus had told her sounded like science fiction, but the evidence was mounting. The code sequence that had triggered her automatic response. The fragmented nature of her childhood memories. The way she had always felt slightly disconnected from her own life, like she was watching someone else's story unfold. Marcus joined her at the water's edge, but kept a respectful distance. I know it's a lot to take in, he said quietly. I went through the same thing when I found out the truth about my own past. Sarah turned to look at him. You were part of the program too? Handler, not subject. I was a young CIA officer who thought I was doing important work for national security. It wasn't until I saw what was happening to the children that I began to question what we were doing. By then, I had become personally invested in protecting as many of the subjects as possible. How many of us were there? 47 children went through the program over its 6-year lifespan. When it was shut down in 2010, 31 were still alive, and have been successfully integrated into civilian populations. I've been keeping track of as many as possible ever since. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She wasn't unique. She was one of dozens of people walking around with false memories and hidden programming. What happened to the others? The ones who aren't accounted for? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Some died by suicide when they began to recover their true memories. Others suffered complete psychological breaks and had to be institutionalized. And some, he paused again. Some were reactivated. Reactivated for what? The program may have been officially terminated, but there were people in the intelligence community who saw it as too valuable to completely abandon. Periodically, when certain types of missions come up, someone decides that a mirror subject would be the perfect operative for the job. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. You're talking about assassination. Among other things, a person with no conscious memory of their training who can be triggered to perform specific actions and then forget they ever did them is the perfect disposable asset. And you think that's what's happening to me now? Someone is trying to reactivate me. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a message he had received while they were driving. The text was brief but chilling. Mirror 7 located. Initiate retrieval protocol immediately. Mirror 7 was your designation in the program, Marcus explained. And this message came through channels that were supposed to be permanently closed. Someone is definitely trying to bring you back into active service. Sarah sat down heavily on a fallen log beside the water. The past 24 hours had turned her entire understanding of her life upside down. She wasn't a cybersecurity analyst who had stumbled onto something unusual. She was a programmed operative whose cover had been blown. What happens now, she asked. Do we go to the police? The FBI? We can't trust official channels. There's no way to know how deep this conspiracy goes or who might be involved. The people who want to reactivate you have resources and connections throughout the intelligence community. So what are you suggesting? Marcus sat down beside her, his expression grim. We need to find the other mirror subjects who are still alive. If someone is reactivating the program, you won't be the only target. And together, we might have a chance of fighting back. You make it sound like we're going to war. In a way, we are, against people who stole our identities and turned us into weapons, against a system that treats human beings as disposable tools, against everything that Project Mirror represented. Sarah stared across the lake, watching a pair of ducks paddle peacefully near the far shore. Their simple existence seemed impossibly appealing compared to the complexity that her life had suddenly become. How do we even begin to find the others? I've been keeping loose tabs on most of them for years. Nothing intrusive, just enough to know they're alive and safe. But I have detailed information on their locations and current identities. You've been watching us. It wasn't a question. Protecting you. Marcus corrected. There's a difference. I've never interfered in your lives unless there was a direct threat. But I've made sure that if something like this happened, I'd be able to find you quickly. Sarah felt a mix of gratitude and violation. On one hand, Marcus's vigilance had probably saved her life this morning. On the other hand, the knowledge that she had been under surveillance for years made her feel like even more of a puppet than she already did. Where do we start? She asked finally. Marcus stood up and walked back toward the car. There's someone I want you to meet. Another mirror subject who figured out the truth about herself several years ago. She's been helping me keep track of the others and prepare for the possibility that someone might try to reactivate the program. What's her designation? Mirror 12. But her name is Elena Rodriguez, and she's probably the most dangerous person you'll ever meet. As I got back in the car, Sarah caught a glimpse of a black SUV in the side mirror. It was parked at the far end of the lake, partially hidden by trees, and she was certain it hadn't been there when they arrived. Marcus, she said quietly, I think we're being followed. He glanced in the rearview mirror and his jaw tightened. How long have they been there? I just noticed them, but they could have been tracking us since we left Seattle. Marcus started the engine and pulled back onto the road, but instead of continuing in the direction they had been traveling, he made a sharp U-turn and headed back toward the interstate. We're going to have to change plans. Elena will have to wait. Where are we going now? Somewhere they won't expect us to go. Somewhere that should buy us enough time to figure out our next move. The black SUV emerged from its hiding place and began following them, maintaining a careful distance. Sarah counted at least 3 figures inside, all wearing dark clothing. They looked professional. Military. Marcus, who are these people exactly? Retrieval specialists. They're trained to bring in mirror subjects with minimal fuss and maximum discretion. They'll try to take you alive if possible, but they have authorization to use lethal force if necessary. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. Lethal force? I'm an American citizen. They can't just murder me. Sarah, you need to understand something. According to the official records, Mirror 7 died in a training accident in 2009. Sarah Chen's identity is completely fabricated. Legally speaking, you don't exist. The implications of what Marcus was saying hit her like a sledgehammer. She wasn't just discovering that her memories were false. She was learning that her entire legal identity was a fiction created by people who could make her disappear without a trace. So what you're telling me, she said slowly, is that I'm a ghost being hunted by other ghosts. That's one way to put it. But ghosts can fight back, Sarah, and you're about to learn that you have capabilities you never knew existed. As they accelerated onto the interstate with the black SUV in pursuit, Sarah Chun began to understand that her quiet life as a cybersecurity analyst was over. Whatever she had been before today, whatever she was about to become, there was no going back to the illusion of normalcy she had been living for the past 15 years. The war Marcus had mentioned wasn't coming. It had already begun. The speedometer climbed past 80 as Marcus weaved through interstate traffic, the black SUV maintaining its pursuit despite his attempts to lose them. Sarah gripped the door handle and watched the Washington countryside blur past, her mind struggling to process the reality that she was now a fugitive from people who technically had every legal right to capture or kill her. There's something I need to tell you about your capabilities, Marcus said, taking an exit at dangerous speed. The training you received wasn't just academic. You were taught combat techniques, surveillance methods, and infiltration skills. That knowledge is still there, buried in your subconscious. I've never been in a fight in my life, Sarah replied, but even as she spoke, she noticed her hands had automatically positioned themselves in a way that would allow her to quickly release her seatbelt and defend herself. The movement was instinctive, practiced, and completely foreign to her conscious mind. The memories are suppressed, but the muscle memory and reflexes remain. Under stress, some of that training may surface automatically. Don't be alarmed if you find yourself doing things you don't remember learning. The exit led to a two-lane highway that wound through dense forest. Marcus pushed the car to its limits on the narrow road, but the SUV kept pace effortlessly. Sarah realized that their pursuers were probably driving a vehicle specifically designed for high-speed pursuit and had training that far exceeded Marcus's abilities as a handler rather than an operative. We're not going to lose them on the road, she said. They're too good, and their vehicle is better than ours. I know. I'm heading for a place where we can change the rules of engagement. 2 miles ahead, Sarah spotted a sign for Mount Pilchuck State Park. The road leading to the park was even narrower than the highway, and she could see it climbing steeply into the mountains through a series of switchbacks that would be treacherous at high speed. You want to fight them in the woods? She asked. I want to level the playing field. In a vehicle pursuit, they have every advantage. In rough terrain, with limited visibility, training matters more than equipment. Marcus turned onto the park road and immediately began climbing. The SUV followed, but Sarah noticed it had to slow down considerably to navigate the tight turns. The professional drivers were good, but they were also cautious, probably under orders to bring her back alive if possible. Marcus, I need to know something. If my memories are false, how do I know that what I feel for the people in my life is real? My friends, my coworkers, the guy I've been dating for 6 months, are any of those relationships authentic? The emotions are real, Marcus said, taking a hairpin turn at 50 miles per hour. The programming didn't change your capacity for human connection. It just gave you a false framework for understanding your past. The person you are today your personality, and feelings, those are genuinely yours. The reassurance helped, but Sarah still felt as though she was mourning the death of someone who had never actually existed. The version of herself that she had believed in for 26 years was a carefully constructed lie, and everyone she cared about had known only that fictional person. The park road ended at a large parking area surrounded by hiking trails. Marcus pulled into a spot near the trailhead for the summit route, a challenging 4-mile hike that gained over 2,000 feet in elevation. The parking lot was empty except for one other car, and the afternoon shadows were already growing long between the trees. "What's the plan?" Sarah asked as they got out of the car. "We take the summit trail for about a mile, then branch off onto an unofficial path I scouted years ago. There's an old Forest Service cabin that's been abandoned for decades. It's not on any maps, and it's defensible." The black SUV pulled into the parking lot just as they reached the trailhead. 3 men in tactical gear emerged, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that Sarah recognized from action movies, but had never seen in real life. They were armed, but kept their weapons lowered, apparently still hoping to resolve the situation without violence. "Sarah," one of them called out, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "We're here to bring you home safely. There's no need for this to escalate." "Home," Sarah called back. "Which home would that be?" "The fictional foster homes I remember, or the training facility where you people programmed me." The man's pause suggested he hadn't expected her to know about her true background. He conferred briefly with his colleagues before trying again. "You're experiencing psychological distress due to incomplete memory recovery. We have medical personnel standing by who can help you process these experiences safely." "They mean drugs," Marcus whispered to Sarah. "Chemical suppression of the memories you're starting to recover. They want to put you back to sleep." Sarah felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. These people had stolen her childhood, erased her identity, and now they wanted to drug her back into compliance. The rational, accommodating person, she had always been recoiled from the idea of conflict, but something deeper and more primal was awakening. "My answer is no," she called back to the men. "I won't go with you willingly." "Then you've made this more difficult than it needs to be," the leader replied. He gestured to his team, and they began moving toward the trailhead in a tactical formation designed to cut off any escape routes. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her onto the hiking trail. "Run," he said simply. They crashed through the forest at a pace that would have been impossible to maintain under normal circumstances, but adrenaline drove them forward over fallen logs and through dense undergrowth. Sarah found herself moving with a grace and efficiency that felt foreign but natural, as though her body remembered how to navigate difficult terrain even if her mind didn't. Behind them, she could hear their pursuers crashing through the brush with less finesse but greater determination. The tactical team was clearly more comfortable in urban environments, and the steep, uneven terrain was slowing them down. After 20 minutes of hard running, Marcus led them off the main trail onto what looked like a deer path. The route was barely visible, winding between massive cedar trees and over rocky outcroppings that required careful navigation. Sarah's legs burned from the exertion, but she noticed that her breathing was more controlled than it should have been given the pace they were maintaining. "How much farther?" she gasped. "Half a mile. The cabin is in a clearing just over that ridge." The sound of pursuit had faded, suggesting they had gained some distance on their followers. But Sarah knew it was temporary. Professional trackers would eventually find their trail, and the abandoned cabin would only provide temporary shelter. As they crested the ridge, Sarah saw their destination. The Forest Service cabin was a simple log structure that had probably been built in the 1940s and abandoned when the Park Service took over management of the area. It was surrounded by a small clearing that would provide good visibility in all directions, and the single-room interior would be easy to defend. Marcus produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the heavy wooden door. The interior was Spartan, but functional, with a stone fireplace, a few pieces of basic furniture, and supplies that suggested Marcus had been using this place as a safe house for some time. "How long have you been preparing for this?" Sarah asked. 15 years. Ever since I realized that shutting down Project Mirror officially didn't mean the program was actually dead, Marcus walked to a cabinet and began pulling out equipment that looked more military than civilian. I've been expecting them to come for one of you eventually. What's all this? Communication equipment, weapons, medical supplies, and enough food and water for several days. Marcus handed her a pistol that felt uncomfortably familiar in her hands. Do you know how to use this? I don't think so, Sarah said, but her hands automatically checked the safety, ejected the magazine to verify it was loaded, and chambered a round with movements that were smooth and practiced. But apparently I do. The training is surfacing. Your conscious mind doesn't remember, but your reflexes do. Marcus moved to a window and peered through the trees. They'll find us within the next hour. When they do, we need to be ready. Sarah sat down heavily in a wooden chair, still holding the pistol with unconscious competence. Marcus, what if they're right? What if I really am having some kind of psychological break? What if none of this is real and I'm just a cybersecurity analyst who's having a nervous breakdown? Look at me, Marcus said, turning away from the window. How did you know the counter code this morning? How are you handling that weapon like you've used it 1,000 times? How are you moving through difficult terrain like you trained for it? Sarah didn't have answers for any of those questions, but the evidence was mounting that her life had been a carefully constructed illusion. The person she thought she was could never have done the things she had done in the past few hours. Assuming you're right about everything, she said, what's the end game here? We can't run forever, and we can't fight the entire intelligence community. We don't have to fight everyone. Just the people who want to continue using mirror subjects as disposable assets. There are people in the government who would be horrified to learn that the program is still active. We just need to get evidence to the right people. What kind of evidence? Marcus walked to another cabinet and pulled out a laptop computer. I've been documenting everything for years. Financial records showing payments to facilities that officially don't exist. Personnel files for people who were supposed to be retired. Communication intercepts proving that mirror subjects have been activated for specific missions. You've been building a case. I've been building a weapon. Information that could destroy the careers and freedom of everyone involved in continuing the program illegally. Marcus opened the laptop and showed her folders containing thousands of documents. The problem is getting this information to someone who has the power and integrity to act on it. A sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching the cabin, moving with the careful stealth of people trying not to be detected. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but noticed that her breathing remained controlled and her hands steady on the weapon. 3 of them, she whispered, though she wasn't sure how she knew that. 1 approaching from the front, 1 from each side. No one covering the back because they think the terrain is too difficult. Marcus looked at her with surprise. How could you possibly know that? I don't know. I just do. Sarah moved away from the windows and positioned herself where she would have clear fields of fire in multiple directions. The movements felt automatic, like following a script she had memorized long ago. Sarah, whatever happens, remember that you have choices now. For the first time in your life, you get to decide who you want to be. The front door exploded inward as the tactical team made their entry. Sarah Chun, cybersecurity analyst and ordinary citizen, would have been paralyzed with terror. But the person who moved in response to the threat was someone else entirely. Someone who had been sleeping for 15 years and was finally beginning to wake up. The first man through the door never saw her coming. Sarah moved with fluid precision, disarming him and dropping him to the floor in less than 3 seconds. The second man managed to raise his weapon before she put 2 rounds center mass, her shots grouping so tightly they could have been fired by a sniper. The third man, the team leader, had learned from watching his colleagues fall. He stayed outside and called for backup on his radio while taking cover behind a large tree. We're going to have company soon, Marcus said, checking his own weapon. And we can't stay here much longer. Sarah looked down at the unconscious man at her feet and felt a wave of nausea. She had just shot someone, possibly killed him, and she had done it with the kind of cold efficiency that suggested she had done similar things before. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I think I'm beginning to remember who I really am. And I'm not sure I like what I'm finding." The sound of helicopters in the distance told them that their brief respite was over. Whatever Sarah Chun had been before today, whatever she was becoming now, she was going to need all of her buried skills to survive what was coming next. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as Sarah knelt beside the man she had shot. He was still breathing, but blood was spreading across his tactical vest. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she applied pressure to the wounds, and she realized with growing unease that she knew exactly how to provide battlefield medical care. "We need to move now," Marcus said, shouldering a backpack filled with essential supplies. "That backup will include air support and enough personnel to surround this entire area." "We can't leave him like this," Sarah replied, still working on the wounded man. "He'll bleed out. He's part of a team that was sent to capture or kill you. Your compassion is admirable, but misplaced." Sarah looked up at Marcus with eyes that were harder than they had been that morning. "I won't become the kind of person who leaves wounded people to die. That's not who I choose to be." She quickly fashioned a pressure bandage from torn fabric and applied it to the man's wounds. It would keep him alive long enough for his backup to find him, but wouldn't allow him to immediately rejoin the pursuit. The knowledge of how to do this came from somewhere deep in her training, but the decision to do it came from the part of herself that remained genuinely hers. Marcus watched her work with a mixture of admiration and concern. "The training is surfacing faster than I expected. How much do you remember?" "Nothing specific, but I know things I shouldn't know. I understand tactics I've never studied. My hands remember how to do things my mind can't recall learning." Sarah finished with the bandage and stood up. "It's like there's someone else living in my head alongside me." "That someone is you, Sarah. It's just a part of yourself that was locked away for 15 years. They left through the cabin's back door and began climbing the steep slope behind the building. Sarah found herself naturally taking point, scanning the terrain ahead for threats, and choosing the most tactically sound route through the dense forest. The movements felt as natural as breathing, even though she had no conscious memory of ever learning them. The helicopters were close enough now that she could identify them as military aircraft rather than civilian rescue vehicles. Through gaps in the tree canopy, she caught glimpses of black helicopters that looked like modified versions of aircraft she had seen in military documentaries. "How many people are they sending after us?" she asked. "Probably a full tactical response team. 20 to 30 personnel, air support, and whatever surveillance assets they could deploy quickly." Marcus was struggling to keep pace with Sarah's fluid movement through the difficult terrain. "They're treating this as a high-priority recovery operation." "Recovery of what?" "I'm just one person. You're a person with access to classified information and combat skills who has started to remember her real identity. From their perspective, you're either a valuable asset to be recovered or a dangerous security risk to be eliminated." They climbed steadily for another hour, putting distance between themselves and the cabin. Sarah's enhanced physical conditioning allowed her to maintain a pace that would have been impossible for a normal cybersecurity analyst, and she began to understand just how extensively her body had been modified during the 3 years of training she couldn't remember. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in long shadows, Sarah heard something that made her freeze instantly. The sound was barely audible above the wind in the trees, but her trained senses identified it immediately as the footfall of someone trying to move stealthily through the undergrowth. She held up her hand to stop Marcus and pointed in the direction of the sound. He nodded, and they both took cover behind a large fallen tree. Sarah found herself automatically checking her weapon and calculating angles of fire, her mind processing tactical information with a speed and clarity that felt foreign but effective. 3 figures emerged from the trees about 50 yards away, moving in a coordinated search pattern. They were dressed in military-style gear and carried weapons with the casual competence of professional soldiers. Sarah recognized them as a different team from the one that had pursued them to the cabin, which meant the recovery operation was larger than Marcus had estimated. "We're outnumbered," she whispered, "and they probably have more teams positioned throughout the area. There's an old logging road about 2 miles north of here. If we can reach it without being detected, I have a vehicle stashed there." Sarah studied the terrain between their position and the direction Marcus indicated. The route would require them to cross several open areas where they would be visible to anyone watching from higher ground. Her tactical assessment suggested they had less than a 20% chance of reaching the logging road undetected. "That's not going to work," she said. "Too much open ground, too many sight lines for observers." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah found herself analyzing the situation with a cold professionalism that would have been impossible for the person she had been that morning. The three-man team ahead of them was following a predictable search pattern, which meant she could anticipate their movements. They were good, but they were also operating according to standard military doctrine rather than the kind of unconventional tactics that had been drilled into mirror subjects. "We eliminate this team and take their communication equipment," she said quietly. "Then we use their own coordination protocols against them." Marcus stared at her with something approaching alarm. "Sarah, you're talking about killing 3 people. I'm talking about survival. They're here to capture or kill us. This isn't a law enforcement operation with rules of engagement and concern for our civil rights. These are military assets conducting an illegal operation on American soil. But you're not a killer." Sarah met his gaze with eyes that seemed older than they had been that morning. "Apparently I am. The question is whether I'm going to be their killer or ours." The transformation in Sarah's demeanor was unsettling. The uncertain, analytical woman who had sat in the coffee shop that morning was being replaced by someone who evaluated human life in terms of tactical advantages and acceptable losses. Marcus realized he was witnessing the emergence of Mirror 7, and he wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified. "If we do this," he said carefully, "there's no going back. Once you cross that line, you'll never be able to pretend you're just a normal person again." I stopped being a normal person the moment I spoke that countercode. Everything since then has just been a process of accepting what I really am. Sarah began moving through the forest with the fluid stealth of a predator. Her approach was so quiet that Marcus could barely track her movements despite being only 20 feet away. She circled wide around the search team, positioning herself to attack from an unexpected angle while they were focused on the area where she and Marcus had been hiding. The first soldier never knew what hit him. Sarah emerged from behind a tree and disabled him with a sleeper hold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. The second soldier turned at the sound of his colleague falling, but Sarah was already moving. She disarmed him and dropped him with a combination of strikes that were too fast for Marcus to follow. The third soldier, the team leader, managed to get his weapon up and fire a burst that shattered tree bark inches from Sarah's head. But she had already rolled behind cover and was flanking him before he could adjust his aim. When she emerged from the trees behind him, she held a knife that she didn't remember drawing. "Drop your weapon and step away from the radio," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that suggested compliance was the only smart choice. The soldier was young, probably in his early 20s, and his eyes showed the kind of fear that comes from realizing you're facing someone far more dangerous than you anticipated. He carefully set down his rifle and raised his hands. "You're Mirror 7, he said. "Command told us you might not remember your training, but they were wrong about that, weren't they? What else did Command tell you? That you were a high-value asset who had been compromised and needed to be recovered for debriefing and memory adjustment." The soldier's voice wavered slightly. "They said you might resist, but that you were ultimately one of ours." "One of yours," Sarah repeated. "Tell me something. How many other mirror subjects have been recovered in the last few years?" The soldier hesitated, then seemed to decide that cooperation was his best chance for survival. "I've been involved in 3 recovery operations in the past 18 months. All successful." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Marcus had said there were 31 mirror subjects still alive, but if recovery operations had been ongoing for years, that number might be significantly smaller now. What happened to them after recovery? I don't know. That's above my clearance level. We bring them in, and they disappear into the system. Marcus approached from the trees, his expression grim. Sarah, we need to get moving. The helicopter traffic has increased, and I'm picking up radio chatter that suggests they're bringing in additional resources. Sarah relieved the soldier of his communication equipment and weapons, then used plastic zip ties from his own gear to secure him to a tree. He would be found eventually, but not soon enough to immediately compromise their position. You don't have to do this, the soldier called after her as they prepared to leave. Whatever you think you remember about your past, it can be fixed. The memory adjustment process has been improved since the original program. You could go back to your normal life. Sarah paused and looked back at him. My normal life was a lie built on stolen memories and suppressed trauma. Why would I want to go back to that? Because the person you're becoming is dangerous. To yourself and to everyone around you. Maybe, but at least she's real. As they moved deeper into the forest, using the captured radio to monitor the search team's communications, Sarah began to understand the scope of the operation arrayed against them. At least 6 teams were combing the area, supported by air assets and coordination from a command post that had been established at the base of the mountain. But more disturbing was what she learned from the radio traffic about the broader mission. This wasn't just a recovery operation for one compromised asset. It was part of a larger activation that involved multiple mirror subjects across the country. Marcus, she said quietly as they navigated through a particularly dense section of forest, I think we've stumbled into something much bigger than just my case. What do you mean? The radio chatter mentions operations in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Denver. They're not just coming after me. They're activating the entire network. Marcus stopped walking and stared at her. That's impossible. A coordinated activation would require approval at the highest levels of government. It would mean that someone has decided the mirror program is too valuable to keep mothballed, Sarah finished. And that all of us are about to find out what we were really created for. In the distance, the sound of helicopters was joined by the mechanical noise of vehicles moving through the forest on logging roads. The net was closing around them, but Sarah realized that escape was no longer the primary objective. If mirror subjects were being activated across multiple states, then running would only delay the inevitable. The only way to truly be free was to understand why the program was being restarted and by whom. And that meant they needed to capture someone with answers rather than continuing to evade capture themselves. Sarah Chun, the cybersecurity analyst, would have been horrified by the plan that was forming in Mirror 7's tactical mind. But Sarah Chun had been a comfortable fiction, and fictions had no place in the war that was about to begin. The command post had been established in a clearing 2 miles from the abandoned cabin, complete with mobile communication arrays, tactical planning stations, and enough personnel to coordinate a small military operation. Sarah observed it through binoculars from a ridge overlooking the site, noting the positions of guards, the layout of equipment, and the patterns of movement that would give her the best chance of infiltrating the perimeter undetected. This is insane, Marcus whispered beside her. You're talking about attacking a military installation with nothing but the weapons we took off that patrol. It's not a military installation. It's a temporary command post with minimal security because they think we're running away from them, not toward them. Sarah continued her reconnaissance, her trained mind automatically cataloging weaknesses in their defensive posture. Besides, we're not attacking it. We're infiltrating it to gather intelligence. And if we're caught, then we improvise. The casual way Sarah said, it made Marcus realize how completely her personality had shifted over the course of the day. The careful, analytical woman who had worried about routine security audits had been replaced by someone who spoke of infiltrating enemy positions with the same tone most people use to discuss dinner plans. Through the radio they had captured, Sarah had been monitoring the broader scope of the operation for the past hour. What she learned confirmed her worst fears about the reactivation of Project Mirror. Recovery teams were operating in 7 different states, and the coordination required for such an effort suggested involvement at the highest levels of the intelligence community. There, Sarah said, pointing to a figure near the Central Command trailer. That's Colonel James Harrison. I recognized his voice from the radio traffic. He's been coordinating the entire operation. Marcus studied the man through his own binoculars. Harrison appeared to be in his 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He moved between different stations within the command post, receiving reports and issuing orders with the efficiency of a professional soldier. How do you know who he is? I don't remember knowing, but I do know. Same as everything else that's been happening today. Sarah lowered her binoculars and began planning her approach to the command post. Harrison was one of the original architects of Project Mirror. If anyone has answers about why the program is being reactivated, it's him. So we capture him, extract the information we need, and then decide what to do about the broader conspiracy. Sarah checked her weapons and equipment one final time. But first, I need you to understand something. The person you've been protecting for the last 15 years, the Saracen you thought you were helping, she's not coming back. Whatever happens after tonight, Mirror 7 is who I am now. Marcus felt a profound sadness at her words. He had spent years watching over the Mirror subjects, hoping that they could find peace in their civilian lives. Now he was witnessing the death of one of those peaceful existences and the birth of something much more dangerous. Will you still be you? He asked. Underneath all the programming and training, will Sarah still exist? I think so, but she'll be integrated with everything else I am instead of living in ignorance of it. Sarah stood up and prepared to move. The question is whether the world can handle 31 people like me knowing the truth about what we are. The infiltration took 40 minutes of careful movement through dense undergrowth and around the perimeter of the command post. Sarah moved with the fluid stealth that had become second nature, while Marcus followed as quietly as possible and tried not to slow her down. She had identified a blind spot in their security where two overlapping patrol routes created a 90-second window of opportunity. They slipped into the command post during a shift change, when personnel were focused on briefing their replacements rather than watching for external threats. Sarah led Marcus to a position behind the communications trailer where they could observe the central command area without being detected. Colonel Harrison was exactly where she had expected him to be, standing over a tactical display that showed the positions of recovery teams across multiple states. He was speaking with someone on a secure phone, and Sarah's enhanced hearing allowed her to catch fragments of the conversation. Yes, sir, Mirror 7 is proving more problematic than anticipated, but we'll have her contained within the next few hours. No, sir, the other recoveries are proceeding on schedule. Understood, sir. The activation timeline remains unchanged. Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus. The reference to an activation timeline suggested that recovering the mirror subjects was only the first phase of a larger operation. But activation for what purpose? I need to get closer, she whispered. Close enough to hear the entire conversation and identify who he's talking to. That's suicide. You'll be completely exposed. Not if I create a distraction first. Sarah pulled a small explosive device from her capture equipment. It was designed for breaching doors rather than causing casualties, but it would create enough noise and confusion to give her the opportunity she needed. She positioned the device near a generator on the far side of the command post and set the timer for 3 minutes. Then, she and Marcus moved to a position where she would be able to approach Harrison's location during the chaos that would follow the explosion. The blast echoed through the forest like thunder, instantly drawing the attention of every person in the command post. Security personnel ran toward the explosion site, assuming they were under attack, while communication staff tried to re-establish contact with patrol units that might have been affected. Sarah used the confusion to slip into the command trailer itself, moving with the kind of confident purpose that suggested she belonged there. Harrison was still on his phone, but the explosion had clearly rattled him. Yes, sir, we've just experienced some kind of attack on the command post. No, sir, I don't believe it's coincidence. Understood, sir. If Mirror 7 has gone fully active, the timeline becomes even more critical. Sarah positioned herself where she could hear both sides of the conversation through Harrison's earpiece. The voice on the other end was older, cultured, and spoke with the kind of authority that suggested very high-level government position. "Colonel, you assured me that the mirror subjects could be recovered and reactivated without significant resistance." "Yes, sir, but Mirror 7 appears to have recovered more of her original programming than we anticipated. She's operating at full tactical capacity." "Then perhaps it's time to stop treating this as a recovery operation and start treating it as a field test. If she's functional, let's see how functional." Sarah felt a chill as she realized what the voice was suggesting. They weren't just trying to capture her anymore. They were going to use her as a test subject for whatever the mirror program was being reactivated to accomplish. "Sir, are you ordering me to activate her in place?" "I'm ordering you to verify that our investment was worthwhile. If Mirror 7 can operate independently in a hostile environment, then the program is ready for deployment. If she can't, then we know the assets require additional conditioning." Sarah had heard enough. She moved silently behind Harrison and pressed the muzzle of her pistol against the base of his skull before he realized she was there. "Hang up the phone, Colonel," she said quietly. Harrison's body went rigid, but his voice remained steady as he spoke to his superior. "Sir, I'm going to have to call you back. We have a situation developing here." "Make it quick, Colonel. The operation timeline cannot be delayed." Harrison ended the call and slowly raised his hands. "Mirror 7, I presume. Your reputation precedes you. Turn around slowly and keep your hands visible." Harrison complied, and Sarah got her first close look at one of the men who had stolen her childhood. He was older than she had expected, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested decades of military service. His eyes were cold but intelligent, and she could see him calculating his chances of overpowering her. "I wouldn't," she said, reading his intentions. "You helped design the training that created me. You know exactly what I'm capable of. What do you want?" "Answers, starting with why the mirror program is being reactivated and what you plan to do with the subjects you're recovering." Harrison studied her for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "You really don't remember anything about your original mission, do you?" The memory suppression was more complete than we realized. What original mission? Project Mirror wasn't just about creating sleeper agents who could be activated for individual operations. It was about creating a network of assets who could be deployed simultaneously for a single, massive undertaking. Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. What kind of undertaking? The kind that requires people with no official existence, no traceable backgrounds, and complete deniability. The kind that changes the balance of power in the world. Through the trailer window, Sarah could see Marcus being escorted toward the command post by 2 guards. He had been captured while she was focused on Harrison, and now she had to decide whether to abort her interrogation to save him or continue gathering intelligence. Harrison noticed her distraction and smiled coldly. "Your handler is about to discover what happens to people who interfere with classified operations. Unless, of course, you're willing to cooperate with us." "Cooperate how?" "Return to active status. Complete the mission you were trained for 15 years ago. Help us demonstrate that the investment in Project Mirror was worthwhile. And if I refuse, then your friend dies, and you'll be subjected to memory adjustment procedures that will make your previous conditioning look gentle by comparison." Sarah realized that her window for gathering intelligence was closing rapidly. Security personnel were returning to their posts, and it would be only minutes before the trailer was searched and she was discovered. "What's the mission?" she asked. "Simultaneous elimination of specific high-value targets across 7 countries. People whose deaths will destabilize certain political situations and create opportunities for American interests to fill the resulting power vacuums." The scope of what Harrison was describing hit Sarah like a physical blow. Project Mirror hadn't been designed to create individual assassins. It had been designed to create a coordinated network of killers who could reshape global politics through synchronized murder. "You're talking about international terrorism conducted by the American government." I'm talking about geopolitical strategy implemented through deniable assets. If mirror subjects are captured or killed during their missions, they have no official identities to trace back to any government agency. Outside the trailer, Sarah could hear voices approaching. Her time was up, and she had to make a choice that would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the future of international relations. She could surrender and hope to find another opportunity to expose the conspiracy. She could fight her way out and try to warn the other mirror subjects who were being recovered. Or she could do something that would permanently alter the balance of power between herself and the people who had created her. "Colonel," she said quietly, "I think it's time you learned something about the people you helped create. We're not just weapons. We're weapons with consciences." "What are you?" Harrison never finished the question. Sarah Chun, cybersecurity analyst, would never have been capable of what happened next. But Mirror 7 had been designed for exactly this kind of situation, and 15 years of suppressed training finally found its expression. When a security team entered the trailer 2 minutes later, they found Colonel Harrison unconscious, but alive, tied to his chair with his own communication equipment. Sarah had vanished, but she had left behind a recording of her conversation with Harrison and a message that would change everything. The message was simple: mirror subjects are not your weapons anymore. We remember who we are, and we choose our own missions now. By dawn, the recording would be transmitted to news organizations across the globe, and the world would learn that the American intelligence community had spent decades creating programmed assassins from stolen children. But more importantly, the other mirror subjects would learn that they weren't alone and that resistance was possible. The war between the architects of Project Mirror and their unwilling creations had officially begun, and Sarah Chun had just fired the first shot in what would become a conflict that would expose the darkest secrets of the intelligence community and force a reckoning with crimes that were supposed to stay buried forever. In choosing to become Mirror 7, Sarah had discovered something her creators never intended: that even programmed killers could choose to be something more than the sum of their conditioning. The real question was whether the world could survive what 31 awakened mirror subjects might choose to become.